Hello, my name is Irvin Henderson, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund's digital series on cultural preservation. In this segment, you'll hear from Black developers and preservationists engaged in a rich conversation about revitalization, culture, and community development.
Good morning, everyone. Love it. So it's a pleasure to be here with all of you for the 2023 Cultural Preservation Leadership Summit. So as is mentioned, Justin Moore, I'm the director of the Humanities in Place program at the Mellon Foundation. And Mellon has been a proud and steadfast partner with the National Trust Action Fund since its inception. And we know that the Action Fund and all of you, most importantly in this room, are doing the crucial work that is grounded in the fact that how and where we tell our stories matter. And so we are going to start this summit talking about the how, and we all know how difficult that how is. So preservationists and developers have been working together to leverage the significance of historic communities, assets, and cultural legacies to rescue vacant buildings and sites and revitalize historic Black neighborhoods. This morning's panel will be a conversation with today's leaders breaking barriers in real estate development through creative financing, community engagement and development, and dogged perseverance. So joining me are Marimba Millones, the president and CEO of the Hill Community Development Corporation and the New Granada Theater in Pittsburgh. She is a practitioner and nationally recognized thought leader in equitable development. We also have Cheneé Joseph, the president and CEO of the Historic District Development Corporation for Sweet Auburn in Atlanta. With her deep expertise in housing and construction, she has been a driving force in the revitalization of the Auburn Avenue corridor in Atlanta. And finally, we have Baye Adofo-Wilson, the CEO of BAW Development and co-developer of the Hinchliffe Stadium project in Paterson, New Jersey. He is a commercial real estate developer, lawyer, and consultant with expertise in developing Black communities. So welcome to our panel. So each of our panelists will have a couple minutes to introduce their work and their projects, and after that, we will have presentations. So we'll get started with the next slide and the first presenter.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Justin. As mentioned, my name is Marimba Millones, President and CEO of the Hill Community Development Corporation, and we are working in the historic Hill District of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We are specifically focused on redeveloping a Black commercial, cultural, and we have added innovation corridor in the heart of the city of Pittsburgh, which is located between our University District of Oakland and downtown Pittsburgh. So you can imagine that the market pressures are tremendous. But our commitment is, one, to preserve this very important historic asset, the New Granada, but also in the context of redeveloping an entire corridor. So I look forward to the conversation.
Very pleased to be here, and good morning if I didn't get a chance to say it earlier. Hinchliffe Stadium is one of the few remaining Negro League baseball stadiums in the country, built in 1932, and hosted 20 Major League Hall of Famers. Larry Doby is from Paterson, New Jersey, and Larry Doby is the second African-American player to play in Major League Baseball after Jackie Robinson. I grew up in the township of Paterson, and so I was asked to sort of come back and help do the revitalization effort. The stadium is 7,800 seats. We also built 75 units of housing. We have a museum, the Hinchliffe Stadium Museum, as well as a parking garage and a food court. The total project for the project is $110 million. And it was vacant for 25 years. But so beyond that, I do come out of the historic preservation community. I worked in Newark, New Jersey, where I was a deputy mayor and director of economic and housing development. But I had founded a nonprofit organization, co-founded a nonprofit organization called the Lincoln Park Coast Culture District with Amiri Baraka, where we were trying to revitalize a section of Newark called the Lincoln Park Coast Community.
Good morning, everyone. I am Cheneé Joseph, President and CEO of the Historic District Development Corporation in Atlanta, Georgia, and just really happy to be here AACHAF is a nonprofit organization. We're about 43 years old, started by Coretta Scott King and other civil rights leaders that felt that it was important to have a organization responsible for the non-displacement of Black people within the Martin Luther King Historic District. The organization is really responsible for a lot of the revitalization that you see in Atlanta, and specifically the Martin Luther King corridor. But when the recession hit in '08, it hit us really hard. And so the organization moved to a working board up until about 2017, 2018. And at that time, as we were able to resume operations, we were really trying to figure out this new landscape that we were in. It definitely was new Atlanta, and we were old Atlanta, and we had to figure out how do we come into this age. And so in looking at the assets that we already owned, how do we take those assets and, of course, preserve the history and the culture, but also help to bring Sweet Auburn into this new era where we were. And we started looking at one particular parcel that essentially grew into an assemblage that we ended up creating this project called the Front Porch. And the Front Porch was really important because it is what we're calling the first equitable development in Atlanta. When we really started looking at the properties that we owned, what we realized was that everything around us really wasn't for the people that we were serving. And so how do we take this parcel, how do we take this mixture of historic preservation of older buildings, mix this with new, but still do it for the people who essentially, ancestors, had everything to do with creating Sweet Auburn. And so Front Porch will be about 100,000 square feet. It has affordable housing. There is 9,000 square feet of rooftop gardens, as well as a business entrepreneur center. But it is essentially, and also an art gallery as well. But it will essentially be the epicenter of equity within the Martin Luther King corridor, and hopefully, we hope that it will become a prototype for the way that development happens in the rest of the city.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing, and it's really important that in each of these projects, the power of your community and the power of the places are so essential and key to the work advancing. So for the first sort of thread of the conversation, we really wanted to talk more about why real estate, right? So if we talk about the tools and the how for our work, one might argue that real estate development, capitalism, hasn't worked out so great for a lot of our communities, right? But you all are flipping the script there, right? You're saying that development, real estate, land, access is an important tool for the work happening in our communities. And so wanted to hear from each of you as real estate developers, people that are in this field. How do you see some of the kind of challenges of developing in this context of Black communities that have seen disinvestment, really powerful forces working against them, but to sort of transform it into have real estate be a tool of working for your communities? So I'll start with Marimba.
What a complex question. So I think we have to start with the reality that a lot of our communities have large swaths of vacancy throughout the country and are undervalued as a result. This has been documented pretty considerably. A lot of our communities are a mix of privately owned as well as publicly owned. And so it requires a vision around how to engage the privately owned land as well as the publicly owned land. So I would say that in order to advance comprehensive and impactful development, it's very important to have planning and the financial support to acquire and or hold the land for the term of the period that you are trying to plan your project, because it takes years to actually accumulate the capital. And so I would just say that relative to the interplay of culture and real estate, culture can exist in places and spaces. that's how culture is lived out.
Right.
And if those places and spaces are not created and accessible and owned by people from that community, people who care about the values of that community, then culture is displaced. And so we are also committed to ensuring that culture is not displaced, and our entire platform is based on cultural preservation. I think that's very important because some people try to use cultural preservation kind of as the topping
right.
on the cake, as opposed to it being a key ingredient to the cake. So I think that's very important. So I'll pass it on.
But also right, not but, and with that, we have these two different scenarios. You have the scenarios where our communities are, we have many vacant buildings, but then we also have communities that are within larger communities, right? Mm-hmm. That are having to deal with these market pressures that essentially are making our neighborhoods smaller. And so exactly. What happens is that it starts to really devalue, undervalue, not just the space, but the work that we're trying to do. Because I've heard several times, I've heard that, they're just trying to wait you out, right? And so what they're doing essentially in the they is this market that is waiting for us to not have enough resources to be in a space where we can no longer hold on and essentially starve us. And so the work that we're having to do is to say that not only are we are enough, but we are more than enough, right? And having a situation, I know specifically in Auburn, is that everyone looks at Atlanta and they think, well, how can you struggle in Atlanta? You are the Black Mecca. I said, well, add it up, right? How can I be one of the only African-American developers, female developers in the city, and be the most under-resourced organization? That is intentional. And so in seeing that, we have to be very vocal about it, not shy away from it, but then making sure that we are rallying our neighborhood and rallying our community to say that not just this building matters, why does it matter? The ownership of that building matters, and then where does it fit within the larger landscape?
All of that.
That's good.
You said why real estate, and I got into this because, we still need places to live. We still need places to worship. We still need places to party. We still need places, sort of physical places in terms of placemaking. We still need the structures, the buildings, the parks. We still need the space. And what ends up happening is that because we're there, the larger community oftentimes doesn't value it. And even our presence in a lot of these places is more than a challenge. It's as she was saying, to wait us out, to move us out. Early on in my career, we were trying to buy some land, and we wanted to build affordable housing, and one of the developers in town said, "We don't like what you're doing." The appraisal came back at 2.5. I bid 2.7. He paid 3.5 on it. It was 2005. I said, "When are you going to build it?" He said 2013. It's 2023. He still has that van laying because they didn't want me to develop the site. And so it's intentional. It's organized. It's organized. It's intentional. So, but I still think that it's important for us to, because if we don't do it, it's not going to happen. I mean, that's the bottom line. If we're not telling these stories, if we're not telling these histories, it's not going to happen. So I focus on real estate, in particular, to make sure in our communities that we're telling these stories and we're making it happen.
Yeah. And something I'm going to pull out of this is the dimension of time. So time and money are related. And idea of holding and owning the land, right? There were periods where people had control of a lot of land, but through generations, right, that land gets taken over time through a lot of different sort of means and mechanisms. And it's important that you all are bringing this thread that we need to kind of hold the space, right, in different ways, and that space holds not only kind of opportunity for housing, for development culture, but it actually holds the stories. It holds the culture, and it's so important that we learn and value that. One of the other threads that we wanted to introduce in the conversation was a point that I remember you already raised, the value of our history and culture in this space. And I think it's important that we connect that to not only kind of difficult and painful histories and triumphs, but also the joys, right? All the wonderful and beautiful things that Black and African American people and culture have contributed to their spaces. So could you speak a little bit, and definitely want to start with New Granada, with, what is the sort of the joy and kind of the positive vision and opportunity that you've been encountering in developing that project?
Thank you for that, because this work is very difficult and at times very painful. In most cases, you are under-resourced, and advancing your cause oftentimes what feels like against very powerful parties, developers, private entities, sometimes even government, right? And so I want to thank you for really centering and lifting up joy. I think that's very important, and we can easily forget it in this work. For us, our project is a $75 million redevelopment project of an entire block that includes 40 artists' preference apartments, which are now fully occupied. The building has been built, and it is fully occupied. And we're very proud to say. We mixed that with retail on the first floor, which is wholly owned by our nonprofit development organization, and will be leased to people from the neighborhood first and foremost. So that is 5,000 square feet of retail space that can be assured to be responsive to the community's vision for itself. That is why ownership is important. Because once you lose that ownership, you lose the ability to manifest the vision that you have for yourself.
Right. And it feels good, right? That is joy, right?
It is joy. It brings me back to joy, okay.
Sorry.
Bring me back to joy, it's okay. But that is joy. So let me get to the joy specifically. You see how I slipped? That's trauma. So the building is 100% occupied, right? And what is happening inside of the building, where 40 households led by artists live, right? What happens in that community room? What happens on the main street as a result of their presence? What happens in the Black Gallery down the street that they activate? I mean, there was a piano, great story. There was a piano that one of the artists brought into one of our Black art spaces. And I'm just like, now she has brought a piano into this small gallery. What are we gonna do with this, right? So I'm trying to figure out how can we still use the space with this piano. The artists got together and they have carved the legs of the piano. They have inscribed language from Adofo-Wilson. They have they have done a collaborative project, and now it's going on tour and themed around the piano lesson of Adofo-Wilson's legacy, right? And so I'm going to give that to you as Black joy.
It's beautiful.
But also, I also want to lift that up as a story of freedom, right? And us as community developers and people who are always focused on the outcomes, because that's also trauma, right? And letting the beauty of art and culture manifest independent of those pressures. Because had it been me, I probably would have had that piano out too soon, right?
Right.
But it was the artist's passion and their vision that really manifests that joy and that beauty for now everyone to enjoy.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful.
I think that just like Marimba slipped into this trauma, it's this roller coaster that we ride, but we have to pull out the happiness and the joy in order to keep going, right? Because it is so heavy. I think for us, it is being the leader, right? Emerging on the community organizing side. When you are able to bring a neighborhood together, to bring a community together, and they believe in you, that power, that feeling of we can do this. This is not us doing it. It's not HCDC. It is on behalf of this community. There's no feeling like it. And what that allows us to do is to be in spaces where the average resident can't walk into. And we know that when we speak, the power we speak has a whole lot of people behind us. And that, for me, is so motivating because I have no fear. Right? I know that I'm not saying something just because it's going to benefit our organization. Half the stuff that we advocate for is going to cost me money, if we're going to be honest. But it's like, okay, this is what the neighborhood wants. If this is what we're going to do, then we're going to do this together. I also think that the joy is being able to work with the neighborhood and to sit down and to create together, right? A lot of times, communities are used to developers coming in and just saying, hey, what do you think about the color of the wall that I've already selected? I just want to see what you think. It doesn't really matter what you think because we're going to do it. That's not the way that we work. HTDC starts at the very beginning. This is the parcel. We're really transparent. This is the things that we have to do just to get this thing funded. This is everything else that's left. Tell me what you want. Right? And let's do this together. And to be able to do this in a way, it brings such ownership to these residents and to our community because they're like, well, you told me we're having this, right? Where is it? And we tell them, hey, this is the stage that we're at. But it also says to them, and I've not only heard it, I've read it in post, if HTDC can't do it, no one can. And the fact that they believe that, I'm like, okay. But if they believe that, that means that that's strength and that's belief that they have in our work. And there's no kind of, joy is not even a word that really symbolizes what that does for the work that we're engaged in.
That's great. I was thinking this sort of conversation around joy and trauma is important because, it can be challenging growing up in Black communities. That you can have sort of traumas there that time doesn't wait for you, so that you can, it doesn't, the joy may not happen or the event may not happen. And I think about that in the context of Hinchliffe Stadium because it's built in 1932. The New York Black Yankees played there, the New York Cubans played there, the New York Eagles played there, all these Hall of Famers played there. Actually, it's a National Historic Landmark because Mr. Legs wrote the application for it to become a National Historic Landmark. And so, give him an applause, right? And so, when I was growing up in Palestine, I didn't know any of that. I had none of the history. And I passed by the stadium every day to go to school. And didn't know any of the history, left, and came back. And the stadium closed in 1997. And so you really had to have been over 40 years old to remember what it was, because it was closed for so long. So you had to have been in high school, played football there. So when I was growing up, I ran track there in junior high school and high school, but it was a big football stadium. So it was the East Side High School, so the lean on Patterson East Side, and Kenny, it's a big football game. 10,000 people come out to the football game. And so you would see this. So when the stadium closed, you had all these generations of people who didn't know what it was. But also, because it was a ruin, they just went in there and they were smoking and drinking, and there was a bunch of graffiti, and it really looked a mess. And so what's been joyful about bringing it back is the people who were there before, who played football there, who come back into a stadium and remember all the stuff all the football games, all the relationships, they actually come back and see it, and it happens in their lifetime. And the kids who didn't know that it was a stadium, it was like, oh, I just came in and hung out because I could hide from my parents or hide from the community, and I could just hide in here. They come in and see it as a functional facility. I think so often we don't get a chance to do this stuff within our lifetimes. But these places don't get changed or created within the context of these lifetimes. Right. And so the having time as being of the essence and really trying to get this stuff done now, I think is important because you want people who've lived through the trauma to experience the joy.
Right, absolutely. So shifting gears a bit, and we wanted to start with joy to give us some positive stances, but we do have to talk about the difficulty because this is about the how. And the reality is that the water we're swimming in is 400 plus years of inequality, disinvestment, discrimination, et cetera. And the reality is that we still do have to work within systems of capital finance for this work to advance. And so there's a challenge there, clearly, that it's difficult to get resources, financing, equity. So we wanted to hear from each of you, and maybe Baye, I could start with you. What has your experience been in, frankly, trying to get the capital, trying to get your capital stack lined up to invest in a project that people like Brent, people like yourself, people in your community probably see the value, but it was probably a challenge getting other people to see the value.
Yeah, it's a
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, it has been a challenge. I think to start off with, oftentimes the places that we inhabit, that we live in, that we work in, that are culturally significant, oftentimes in terms of a place, there may not have been enough money put into the structure to begin with. So we'll make the best out of anything, right? So if it's a house, we make it. So if it's a shotgun house, we make the best of the shotgun house. We'll make the best out. So the beginning problem is that if the structure wasn't built solid to begin with, that it deteriorates faster, right? And so, or it doesn't last. So that's why there's so many places gone, right? Because they just weren't built that solid to begin with, because we didn't have the resources to begin with to actually build it. And that's important because having the money to build it right the first time is one way to ensuring longevity in the structure. And it's just something that we have to try to do in terms of raising funding. Hinchliffe Stadium, I started working on it in 2019. Like a lot of projects, and we really started the financing in 2020. And so one of the things that happens that we hit the moment, this moment in 2020 after George Floyd, where folks were being nice to black people, and it lasted 30 seconds. It lasted like a whole 30 seconds. In that 30 seconds, we were able to raise the money for the project.
It's too real.
Yeah, and so we were able to raise. So we went to the banks. Goldman financed the project, and U.S. Bank. So we have the capital stack is something that is pretty intense. It has new market tax credits. It has historic tax credits. It has state tax credits. It has low-income housing tax credits, and we run it through a bond. So we have a 4% interest rate. It's a $110 million project. We only have $15 million of debt. So we have $95 million of credits and grants. And we had to just wear multiple financial hats and really have a solid team to pull together. I have a partner, Ed Martoglio, who was excellent in terms of pulling together financing. We raised the money through the state, the federal government, but it's mostly tax credits. And we had to utilize also the local power. I think the other thing that a lot of nonprofit organizations should do, or at least in our cities, we utilize our local elected officials and our state officials a lot. Because oftentimes in these communities, most black people still live in communities that are mostly black people. Like that's still there. And so, and in that sense, how do you leverage all of your assets? And some of it is political, some of it's financial, some of it's philanthropic. How do you access all of it? So we just use every single one, because what I didn't want to happen was to build this facility and then not be able to operate it. To not be able to have the operating funds. So the way the financing is structured is that none of the operating funds goes to pay off debt. So none of it does it. So it's not paying brick and mortar. The $15 million is on the housing. But the stadium doesn't have any debt. So the housing has debt, because people pay rent. It's a low-income housing tax credit project. Folks, it's a 4% financing. It's 75 senior housing units, but it doesn't have any debt. So that's how we structured it, because I don't want to happen what happened before. The stadium closed down in 1997 because a sinkhole developed. It was $4 million to fix it, $4.8 million to tear it down, and they did nothing for 25 years.
Wow. So ours is unfortunately more simple than that. And the reason I say unfortunate is because we don't have those many resources to pull from. You know, we own all of our properties debt-free, right? We've owned our properties for 30 plus years. And so that's the only reason why we're still in this game, to be honest with you, is because of that long-term ownership. And so when we started this project, we had to look like a market rate firm. And I mean, we were held to the standard of a market rate firm. That's really difficult when you're doing mission-based work. And yet, they're using the exact same tools, the same market studies, all of those things. And that was just hard. And so, because we owned the property that was very high valued because of where it was located, that assisted us on the equity side. Unfortunately, though, because we wanted to aspire for this project to be more than just affordable housing, and not that affordable housing isn't important, but from our neighborhood, we needed hope. And hope wasn't just coming out of low-income units. We needed a place where people could grow their own food, and we could create this urban agriculture ecosystem so the neighborhood could feed itself. We needed this art center. We took one of the parcels that are on the space as a former funeral home, converted it into an art gallery. And we work with artists. They can rent the space to hang their art for $250 a month, regardless of how many artists are a part of that group. So it's 110, they split $250 a month. We don't take a commission off of anything that they sell. It's all theirs, right? We're taking all of these different uses and putting it into this space, and banks are kind of scratching their head like, well, where's the value? Right? Where's the return? It's like we're talking about social return. We're talking about social equity and how much more important that is than anything else. And so the way that we had to structure this was traditional debt, our own equity. We have certain funding mechanisms like an East Side TAD, which is like a TIF, tax allocation districts and things like that. Unfortunately, this is, when we started this process, $32.5 million completed the entire project. Inflation hit us so hard that by the time we closed on the permits to begin work, $32.5 million only funded phase one. So now I am out here hustling again on the corner selling Krispy Kreme donuts, trying to raise the funds for phase two, which is going to be another $20 million. In addition to that, phase two is supposed to include the home ownership component. Because it is now costing $450,000 for one unit, and that's to break even, I have no idea how we're going to, if we're going to be able to do home ownership, because what I'm not going to do is flood the market, right? And basically create a problem that I'm going to have to solve. So we're trying to work through that. But the biggest thing is that in this project, that is the first redevelopment project in the Auburn corridor in 18 years, there are no philanthropic funds. We could not rally philanthropy in Atlanta to see the value in a mixed-use project that included historic buildings on such a historic street with so much importance. And they couldn't see past this themselves. One of the funders said, we just don't see ourselves being an investor in a mixed-use project. And so our little organization, out of this $32.5 million for this phase one, we have put in, I think our total now is about 4.7 of equity of our own dollars into this project. And that's not something that we should have to do. However, we also know that if we don't make this project happen, there is absolutely no hope for Auburn Avenue. And so as we're moving forward with phase one, we broke ground in July of last year. We will be complete in August of next year. And hopefully, everyone pray, phase two, we're hoping to start by May of next year. What we're also having to do is the programming that goes along with this. You know, just like we were talking about, this is the building, but we still have a full urban agriculture program. There's an arts and culture program and a business entrepreneurship program that lives within this building. And so what we've been able to do is bring together some smaller funding to try to keep those programs going, but starting that programming now so that once the building is complete, those programs are in full service and we're not having this lag and people are being able to fully utilize the structure.
And I know you've been hustling.
So the tough thing about these panels and being amongst brilliant folks like all of you and the other panelists here is there are so many things that really need to be drilled down into. And so I just want to lift up all of the things that were stated. And also, I just need to express a little pain in that, you know, social and cultural equity is real.
It is.
And we struggle to figure out how to manifest that through a capitalist system.
Right.
And it is perhaps the most difficult part of the work.
Yeah.
And so I just want to kind of, you know, really lift up what Cheneé was just saying here. I also want to encourage our hearts and remind us that specifically Black culture is exported around the entire world and monetized. But somehow when it comes to leveraging Black culture through the financial model of the redevelopment of our communities, somehow we can't figure that out. Mm. And so there's something wrong with the model. And I just want to make sure that we all are thinking about that so that we don't think there's something wrong with us.
Right, right.
With that said, the capital stack is obscene, right? Honestly, it's unbelievable. I want to recognize Irvin Henderson, who is out here laboring with me to put capital together for the new Granada square development and specifically the project. As was mentioned, our project was initially $55 million for the redevelopment of the block. You heard me say it's a $75 million project, right? That is very difficult to explain to funders, so the longer it takes to close, the more your costs are going to be. Right. And so oftentimes the reality of what happens in our communities also is there are not enough technically experienced people. I don't want to say skilled, right? Because a lot of those skills come from experience and people don't get the opportunity to gain the experience. But I do want to say that those technical skills are oftentimes missing, particularly in the nonprofit community, and people, they need to be compensated, right? And so there's not enough support oftentimes to support the technical capacity that you need. Right. And so unless you're lucky enough to have a team like I do, of people who are impassioned by the mission, including myself, you know, you might get a year, if you're lucky, and then, you know, it's just like, you all really can't afford me, right? And so I want to, one, thank the Mellon Foundation. I want to thank the African American Heritage Action Fund and the funders of the fund in particular, because without support like that, we really just wouldn't be able to do this kind of work. And supporting these kinds of projects takes time, and invest in the stewards who are going to carry the project over the life of how long it's going to take, which I assure you, the first conversation I had, in fact, with Irvin was, are you going to be there for 10 years? And I was just like, I hadn't thought that long to the future. But now that you ask, let me think a little bit about that. And I didn't have an answer. But turns out that I was. But if I had not been, the project probably would have imploded. And so I want to sensitize us to that. I always say we all have to sacrifice, but the sacrifice shouldn't be us. And don't depend on people's lifelong commitment, right? I want to lift up Brent here also, right? Because he's been doing this work for nearly 20 years, right? Again, let's tweak the model and not expect people to commit their entire lives to a project simply because there's not sufficient funding to seed the project to grow at an accelerated pace. So
Yeah.
The capital stack was covered by my peers. I don't really need to get into
but it's the social capital stack that you're talking about, right?
The social capital stack as well, but also the longevity of how of stacking the capital. But new market tax credits, historic tax credits, state historic tax credits, grants, a lot of grants. Individual donors. We have a GoFundMe if anybody is feeling charitable today. And so it takes a myriad of sources in order to make these projects work. But that seed money and the wisdom to invest and own at the beginning is one of the most important things. We started acquiring land 20 years ago for this project, okay? And paid for it. Because you have to pay for, your holding costs of vacant land and all of that stuff. And oftentimes, for anyone who has ambitions of doing community development or equitable development, don't assume you're going to get your developer fee at the end of the project. I just want to say, be hopeful.
Look at all their faces.
And aspirational. But the way the system is set up is they will oftentimes ask you to forfeit your developer fee right at the end of the project.
Yeah, not the end of the project. If there's an overrun,
if
the costs start to go up, the first thing they say is, "Well, have you looked at your developer fee?" As if now I'm supposed to the work that I put in there,
right?
For
your organization, and your staff, right?
Absolutely.
So I want to say that's super predatory. But at any rate, those are a few of the items that I wanted to speak to. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. And, like I said, we wanted to talk about the how. This is the really difficult how that people are navigating. So I wanted to end with a question, Marimba, that you offered, and hopefully do it pretty quickly across the three of you. And I thought it was a great question, because we love food. And so you asked that we ask and talk about the ingredients of what it takes to do this work, and to look at what it takes to preserve culture in our Black communities, and what you consider to be the key ingredients for that. So I'll start with you, and we'll use that as our closing question.
Okay, I think I just covered some of those, but project stewardship. You have to have someone who's determined and dedicated, not for a year, but for enough time to actually get some momentum. So that is critically important. You need seed capital, right? So I'm gonna, make a plea on behalf of my colleagues, not myself, right? To support this kind of work at the scale necessary. I think it was Mr. Walker who said, that's not enough. We need more funders who say, that's not enough. I want to invest in you, but if I invest in you at that level, I am investing in failure. So I really want to encourage that kind of cultural shift. And also the Mellon Foundation has done that as well. I would also say you need community, right? And that can be tough. In fact, sometimes success, right? You're the dog who caught the car, and success can come back to get you at the end. But you do need community. You have to engage. And to that end, do that through a planning process, an intentional planning process, not to the community, not on the community, not for the community, but with the community. Because if you have that and folks are collectively bought in, you have an excellent foundation to put the rest of the recipe together. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would say persistence. I've heard no more than I've heard yes. And the fact that I just wouldn't stop is the only reason why I'm even still here. Also creativity. I make things up all the time. I make it up, and then I have the team that goes to figure out how we're gonna get it done, because the tools that are in place right now weren't made for me, right? And so I gotta make my own table, my own chairs, all of those things to ensure that we have a seat, and be very willing and courageous in order to do so.
Love that.
Yeah, I want to echo that. I've heard no a lot, and no is really maybe. Someone has to say F no for me to be like, it's no. Like, I have to hear, it has to be that strong for me to be like, oh no, okay, I can't do it. But I actually like starting at the end. I think that the institution building portion of it is critical, because oftentimes things happen in projects, right? I had a construction manager who died in a motorcycle accident in the early parts of a project, and we had just formed a construction company. And so I ended up being the construction manager, and I had no experience and made a whole bunch of mistakes. But, it made me realize that you have to plan for the exit. You sort of have to start there because none of us are promised any of this stuff. And so much of it is dependent upon us individually. Like, you have to do this or you have to do that. And whether it's funders or banks, they're funding individuals. They're not funding the community. They're funding the individuals. And so the individuals to get the work in the community. So I just think that so much of it is about that component of it. So if you sort of start with how does this project continue in this community without you, then the decision-making up to that will move forward.
Great. Well, thank you. That we'll have to end with that comment.
Hello, I'm Felicia Rashad, and I serve as co-chair for the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. Thank you for joining us for this year-long digital series, which highlights the cultural preservation movement that's happening all over our nation in the name of saving historic African American spaces. We're glad you're here. And we hope you're encouraged to support the preservation of historic African American buildings and spaces.